Before you hear this story, let me ask you, have you ever shared a quiet moment with someone you never thought twice about until suddenly everything changed? It was just a simple dinner party, some wine, soft music, familiar laughter. But when everyone else had left and my husband went to bed, his friend Ethan stayed. What happened in the stillness of that night left me breathless. Not in the way you'd think. The words he said, I still hear them echo. Where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. This story, this moment could happen anywhere. Now let me take you back to the night everything shifted. I was wiping down the granite counter. The sound of the sponge dragging across the cool surface, almost meditative. The lights in the kitchen were dimmed. The scent of red wine and roasted rosemary chicken still lingering in the air. The party had just wrapped up. Not a big one, just 6 of us. My husband Daniel, me, and a couple of his old college buddies including Ethan. Ethan had always been one of Daniel's closest friends. The kind that showed up for milestone birthdays, helped move furniture when we remodeled the living room, or joined us for Thanksgiving when he didn't feel like flying home. But we'd never really been close. I mean cordial, of course. I played hostess, refilled his glass, made small talk, but he was Daniel's friend. That line was clear. That night, Daniel had gone upstairs early. A little too much bourbon, a full stomach, and a long week of work behind him. He kissed me on the cheek and mumbled, "Clean up tomorrow. Let's go to bed, babe." I nodded and watched him ascend the stairs. Ethan remained behind, lounging at the far end of the dining room table, his chair turned slightly to the side. He was nursing the last of his drink, watching me with a quiet attentiveness I hadn't noticed before. "I can help you finish cleaning," he offered, his voice low, unrushed. I glanced over, half smiling. "You've done enough damage to my wine talk, I think." He grinned, that familiar smirk. It had always seemed playful, maybe a little cocky, but tonight it felt different. "I like the quiet after everyone leaves," he said after a pause, his eyes not leaving mine. I dried my hands on a towel and leaned against the counter, arms folded. "It's the only time the house breathes." He nodded slowly, then stood, crossing the room. "You throw a good party, Olivia. You always have. It's like there's something about you that makes people want to stay a little longer." The comment landed heavier than I expected. Not flirtatious. Not exactly. Just sincere. Unexpectedly warm. "Well," I said, clearing my throat, "Daniel does most of the inviting. I just cook and fluff the pillows." Ethan looked at me, then really looked. "You downplay yourself too much. You know that." I laughed softly, a little embarrassed, unsure how to respond. "That's what a good hostess does." "No," he said gently. "That's what someone does when they're used to being overlooked." My chest tightened. I didn't know how to respond to that. I wasn't used to anyone seeing me like that. Certainly not Ethan. I looked away, suddenly fascinated by the half-empty tray of dessert on the counter. There was a long silence between us, comfortable but charged. I broke it. "I should get the rest of these dishes to the sink." Ethan didn't move, just spoke again. Quieter this time. "Olivia, can I ask you something? And you don't have to answer if you don't want to." I turned to him. "Of course." He hesitated, as if weighing the moment. Then finally, "Are you happy?" There it was. A simple question. But somehow it cracked something inside me. I should have given the easy answer, the polite one, the yes, of course. But instead I looked at him, and something in his expression made me feel safe. Safe enough to tell a truth I hadn't spoken aloud in years. "I don't know," I said quietly. "Some days, yes. Others, I feel like I disappeared somewhere along the way." Ethan stepped closer, not invading but present, listening. "I love Daniel. I continued. But I think somewhere between kids and careers and the years we stopped counting, I forgot who I was outside of wife and mother and cook, hostess, planner of birthday cakes and laundry queen." He nodded slowly. "I've watched you, Olivia. Not in a weird way, I swear," he added quickly, smiling. "But I see how you carry everything. For Daniel, for your family, and I've always wondered who carries you." I felt my throat tighten. I didn't have an answer for that. Maybe no one. Maybe I hadn't let anyone. "I don't mean to pry," he added. Tonight I saw you laughing with everyone, lighting up the room, and then I saw how quiet you got when Daniel left. Like a switch. I didn't even realize I'd done that. But he was right. I did switch off when Daniel left the room, when the guests walked out the door. like my performance was over. I sat at the table suddenly feeling the weight of the evening. Ethan sat too. You don't have to always hold it all together. You know, the truth of it hit me in the chest. I wouldn't know how to let go, I admitted. He didn't try to fix it. He didn't offer platitudes or cliches. He just sat there across from me, eyes steady. I think, he said finally, it starts with letting someone see the real you, not the version everyone expects. I swallowed hard. And what if I don't know who that is anymore? His voice was so soft then. Then maybe it's time to remember or discover her again. The clock ticked softly in the background. The house was quiet. My husband slept upstairs. And here I was in the kitchen at midnight with a man who saw me more clearly in one conversation than I had felt in years. And I wasn't afraid. I was awake. Ethan, I said, my voice shaky. He reached across the table, not touching me, just resting his hand near mine. No pressure, no expectations. I just didn't want to leave tonight without saying that you matter. You always have. My fingers brushed his only for a second, but it felt like more than any kiss I'd had in years. I didn't know what this moment meant, but I knew this. Something inside me had stirred, and nothing would be quite the same again. The following morning arrived with a kind of stillness I wasn't used to noticing. It wasn't just the usual hush of a quiet house. It was something deeper, a kind of pause in my chest, like my heart was holding its breath. I stood by the kitchen window, my coffee cooling in my hands, staring at the backyard as the early sun climbed over the fence. The party leftovers were still there from the night before. Stray glasses on the patio table, a crumpled napkin on the deck, candles burned down to the wick. But it wasn't the mess that stayed with me. It was the conversation. Ethan's words, his eyes, the unexpected warmth of them. Daniel was still upstairs, snoring lightly. He'd woken briefly to complain about his hangover before rolling over with a groan. I didn't wake him. I didn't want to explain why I was already dressed or why I kept pacing from the window to the sink and back again. Because I didn't know myself. I wasn't sure what that moment with Ethan had been. Was it just two people being honest in the quiet hours after a party? Or was it something else? Something I had no right to be replaying in my mind. I wasn't proud of the way I kept hearing his voice in my head. You don't have to always hold it all together. Maybe it's time to remember who you are. No one had asked me that in years. By noon, I had convinced myself it was a passing moment. A late-night vulnerability brought on by wine and nostalgia. Nothing more until I saw the envelope. It was tucked in beside the coffee maker, my name written on the front in slanted, unmistakably male handwriting. I froze, glanced around like someone might be watching, even though I was alone. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside, a single line on a folded piece of white notepaper. Olivia, if you ever want to talk, really talk. Call me. No judgment. No expectations. Just someone who sees you. And below it, Ethan's number. I held the note like it might burn me. My first instinct was to throw it out, crumple it, bury it deep in the kitchen trash, cover it with coffee grounds and old napkins. But I didn't. Instead, I slipped it into the drawer beneath the phone, beneath the coupons and loose batteries and broken pens, the place where forgotten things lived. And yet, I didn't forget. 2 days passed. Daniel went back to work. I went back to routine. Groceries, laundry, garden center runs. But something in me was off-kilter, like I was seeing the world in slightly sharper focus, or maybe just seeing myself differently. I started noticing how Daniel rarely looked at me when I talked, how his eyes often stayed glued to his phone or the TV or his newspaper, even when I was mid-sentence. I noticed how often I stopped myself from saying what I really thought just to keep things easy. It wasn't that Daniel was unkind. He wasn't. He was Daniel, reliable, predictable, steady, the same man who brought me tulips on my birthday every year, but never noticed when I cried silently in the shower. That week, I did something I hadn't done in years. I sat on the back deck alone one evening with a glass of wine and let myself listen to the silence. Not just hear it, listen. And that's when I called. My hand hovered over the keypad for a full 5 minutes before I finally hit the green button. Ethan answered on the second ring. Olivia. The sound of my name in his voice felt strange, familiar, but different. Like he'd been waiting to say it. I wasn't sure if I should call, I said quietly. I hoped you would, he replied. But I didn't expect you to. Not really. There was a pause. I could hear him breathing. Maybe I was breathing too loudly. My heart was pounding in my ears. I haven't been able to stop thinking about what you said. I confessed about disappearing. I didn't say it to make you question everything, he said gently. I just wanted you to know that someone sees you, the real you. I don't even know who that is anymore, I whispered. Then let's find her. The lion went quiet for a beat. I meet at Olivia, he added. Not like a big dramatic thing. Just start small. Coffee, a walk, no pressure, just two people catching up, no guilt, no lines crossed, just honesty. I exhaled slowly. Okay, I said. Yes, I'd like that. We agreed to meet the next morning at the cafe 2 blocks from my house. The same one I had passed 100 times but rarely went into. Felt like neutral ground, public safe. But I didn't feel safe. I felt exposed, terrified, and yet more alive than I had in years. That night I couldn't sleep. I watched Daniel snore gently beside me and felt a tangle of emotions. Love, guilt, frustration, numbness, longing. Was it wrong to want to feel seen, to be heard without interruption? Was it wrong to want something more than polite nods and daily routines? I didn't have those answers. But the next morning, I stood in front of my closet longer than usual. I chose a soft blue blouse I hadn't worn in years, one that made my eyes look brighter. I brushed my hair with care, put on a hint of perfume. Not for him, for me. When I walked into that cafe and saw Ethan already sitting there, looking up with a smile that didn't ask questions or expect anything, something deep inside me began to wake up again. And for the first time in a very, very long time, I wanted to know where that awakening might lead. The cafe smelled of roasted beans and fresh cinnamon that morning, a comforting mix that seemed to wrap around me the moment I stepped inside. It was quiet, save for the soft clink of mugs and the occasional hiss of steam from the espresso machine. A few locals chatted in low voices, noses buried in newspapers or laptops, and there he was. Ethan sat in the corner booth, facing the window, a half-empty mug in front of him. He looked up before I even fully walked in, as if he had felt me enter. His smile was calm, unassuming, the kind that didn't press, didn't assume, just welcomed. I gave a small wave and walked over, suddenly aware of every step, every breath. You came, he said, rising just enough to meet me with a warmth that wasn't performative. It was real. I did, I replied, slipping into the seat across from him. Thought I might back out, but here I am. He smiled gently. I'm glad you didn't. We sat in a pocket of silence for a moment. Not awkward, just delicate. I wasn't sure what to expect, I admitted. Me neither, he said. But I figured we could just talk. No pressure. I just wanted to give you space. A space maybe where you don't have to be anyone but Olivia. And just like that, the tightness in my chest loosened. I nodded, looked out the window and then back at him. Ethan, why me? He tilted his head. What do you mean? You've known me for years. I've been background. Daniel's wife. The one who refilled your drink and handed you clean towels when you crashed in the guest room. Why now? Why that night? Ethan leaned back in the booth, his eyes thoughtful. Because that night I finally saw you, he said. Not just as Daniel's wife. Not just the woman who throws a good party. I saw a woman who looked like she was holding 1,000 invisible things in her hands. A woman who laughs for everyone else, but whose eyes go quiet when no one's looking. His voice stayed steady, but I saw the emotion behind his words. I guess, he continued, I just didn't want you to think no one noticed or cared. I stared down at the mug the waitress had placed in front of me. Steam curled upward, my fingers wrapped around the warmth anchoring me. I didn't expect any of this, I whispered. I didn't either, he said. But I think life has a way of shaking us awake when we've been asleep too long. We talked for over an hour about everything, nothing. The way Daniel used to bring me daisies from the farmer's market in our early years. How I used to love painting in the mornings before the kids were born. How Ethan had spent the last decade drifting from relationship to relationship, never quite landing. He listened like no one else had in years, not waiting to respond, just listening. And when I spoke about how small I'd started to feel, how invisible, his eyes didn't flinch. He didn't try to fix it. He didn't pity me. He just held space. When we finally stood to leave, something had shifted between us. There were no declarations, no touches, just a quiet current of understanding. Can I see you again? He asked softly. I paused. Yes, but I need to go slow. I'm still figuring this out myself. What I want. What this even is. He nodded. Whatever pace you need. I'm not going anywhere. As I walked home, the summer breeze brushing against my arms, I felt a strange mixture of fear and hope. I wasn't naive. I knew this was dangerous territory, not because anything wrong had happened, but because of what could. That evening I cooked dinner like I always did, set the table, kissed Daniel on the cheek. He didn't ask about my day. He never did. He complimented the meal, though mentioned the new client his firm landed. I smiled and nodded in the right places, but inside something had already begun unraveling. Or maybe awakening was the better word. Because that night, when I lay in bed beside a man who loved the version of me he thought was content, I found myself reaching quietly for the drawer in a nightstand. Not for Ethan's note. Not for anything in particular. Just to remember that I was allowed to have something that was mine. Even if it was just a feeling, a truth, a small bloom of something I thought was long gone. And in the dark, I whispered to myself the words that had been rising like a tide all week. I'm still here. And finally I believed it. The days that followed unfolded like a quiet, cautious dance. Nothing between Ethan and me was over it. There were no secrets exchanged behind locked doors. No clandestine meetings that betrayed vows. But there was a growing closeness that was undeniable. And more than that, there was a shift within me. A week after the cafe, we met again at a park this time. Late morning, shaded by white oaks, we walked slowly, like old friends, like two people who had known each other for longer than we had. There was no need to fill every silence. The hush between our words felt natural, even necessary, as if our thoughts needed space to settle before finding their way out. Ethan had a way of noticing things. A woman on a bench who had tears in her eyes. A crooked street lamp that looked like it had bent under the weight of time. The way my shoulders tensed when I talked about Daniel. I'm not unhappy, I told him as we stood near the duck pond. Not really. That's the strange thing. Daniel is a good man, solid. He's never raised his voice. He's never strayed. We built a life together. But sometimes I feel like we built a life around something I'm no longer inside of. Ethan didn't speak right away. He just watched the ducks glide across the water with a thoughtful stillness. You ever sit in a room full of people? He said finally, and feel like you're completely alone. I nodded all the time. He glanced at me then, his eyes soft. That's how I felt at your dinner party until you started talking to me in the kitchen. I smiled gently. We didn't even say that much. No, he agreed. But it was real. That word stayed with me. Real. In all my years with Daniel, we developed a rhythm. A routine so polished it could run itself. But somewhere along the line we had stopped asking real questions. We assumed we knew everything already. Ethan didn't assume, he asked. He listened. And slowly he made me remember the parts of myself I'd put away in boxes marked someday. That night Daniel and I had dinner like always. He talked about the new associate at the office, how they couldn't stop using buzzwords in meetings. I laughed when he did, not because it was funny, but because I didn't want to seem distracted. But inside I was miles away. After dinner I went out to the backyard by myself. The sky was strewn with orange and fading blue. I sat under the arbor where the jasmine was just beginning to bloom. I hadn't sat out there in months, years maybe. Ethan texted me then. I hope today gave you a little peace. I didn't answer right away. I just stared at the message, rereading it. It was simple. No pressure, no questions, just presence. Eventually I replied. It did. Thank you. I told myself I could stop any time, that I wasn't doing anything wrong, and I believe that still do. But I also knew I was standing at a crossroads, one foot still in the world I had built with Daniel, and one toe reaching towards something I didn't yet understand. A week later, Daniel came home with tickets to a weekend retreat his firm was sponsoring. A couple's getaway at some resort in the hills. I thought it might be good for us, he said, placing the envelope in front of me like a peace offering. We've both been distracted. You've been quiet lately. I hesitated. You think a retreat is going to fix what's off between us? His brow furrowed. I didn't know something was off. That's what I mean. You haven't said anything. I looked at him, then really looked at the lines in his face, the exhaustion behind his smile. He wasn't the enemy. He never had been. But somewhere along the line, we had both fallen asleep behind the wheel of our marriage. I don't know if a weekend is going to be enough, I said softly. But I'm willing to try. So we went. 2 nights in a suite with a view of the lake. Seminars about communication, trust exercises, long dinners with other couples pretending everything was fine. It was nice but also empty. The words didn't reach me. Not the way Ethan's had. The final night, Daniel and I sat out on the balcony, the air cool against our skin. He reached for my hand. "Are we okay, Olivia?" I looked at our fingers, interlaced out of habit more than feeling. "I think we've forgotten how to be real with each other," I said. "I think we say the right things but we stopped seeing each other a long time ago." He didn't respond right away, just tightened his grip. Maybe afraid that letting go meant the end. "I don't want to lose you," he said. And I believed him. But I also didn't know how to tell him that a part of me was already gone. When we returned home, I spent the next few days walking through the house like it was a museum. I looked at the framed photos, the guest towels, the spice rack I used to alphabetize. Everything was tidy, familiar. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I didn't quite belong inside it anymore. One evening, I went to the park alone. The same one Ethan and I had walked through. I sat on the same bench by the pond and watched the light fade over the water. I didn't call him. I didn't need to. But I knew when the time came I would see him again. And not because I needed something from him, but because he reminded me that I was still someone who deserved to be more than background. Someone who had thoughts, dreams, and the right to rediscover herself even at 57. This wasn't about leaving my husband. It was about coming back to myself.